Captain Jake Morrison sat at the long metal table in the center of Galactic Council Station Omega-7. The room was cold and gray, built for function rather than comfort. Around him sat representatives from 3 of the galaxy's most powerful species, and Jake knew they all thought humans were weak. The draconian General Vexnul was the size of a small building. His dark scales caught the light from the ceiling, and his yellow eyes never blinked. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks, grinding together. Next to him sat Ambassador Zeftar from the Carathian Empire. The Carathian looked like a tall, thin human, but with blue skin and a brain twice the normal size. His kind prided themselves on being the smartest species in the galaxy. At the far end of the table floated Seer Yilmoth from the Xanathi Collective. The Xanathi had no solid form, appearing as a shifting cloud of silver light. They claimed to see beyond the physical world into realms of pure thought and energy. Jake looked small compared to these beings. He was average height for a human, with brown hair going gray at the edges and kind eyes behind wireframe glasses. Next to him sat Commander Lisa Brooks, a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and a military uniform that seemed too big for her thin frame. The trade route through the Vega sector would benefit all our species, Jake said in his calm, patient voice. Humans are willing to provide labor and basic manufacturing in exchange for access to your advanced technologies. General Vexnul leaned forward. The table creaked under his weight. Labor, yes, that is what humans are good for. You lack the strength for true conquest and the intelligence for real innovation, but you work hard. Ambassador Zeftar nodded. Our analysis of human capabilities confirms this assessment. You have reached space through determination rather than brilliance. Admirable in its own way, but limited. Jake smiled and nodded. We know our place in the galaxy. We're not warriors like the Draconians or geniuses like the Carathians. We're just trying to find our way. Commander Brooks shifted in her chair but said nothing. She had been quiet through most of the meetings, speaking only when directly asked questions about human military strength. Her answers were always the same. Humans had small defensive forces focused on protecting trade routes and colonies. The meeting continued for hours. Jake discussed shipping schedules and manufacturing quotas. He asked polite questions about alien technologies that humans might someday hope to understand. He laughed nervously when the alien representatives made jokes about human limitations. General Vexnul grew bored and started telling stories about draconian military victories. The Helix Rebellion lasted 3 days, he said, his voice full of pride. Their entire fleet was destroyed. Their homeworld surrendered after we showed them what happens to those who defy the Draconian Empire. Efficient, said Ambassador Zeftar. Though we Carathians prefer to defeat our enemies through superior strategy rather than brute force. When the Nexus Coalition challenged our territorial claims, we simply calculated their supply lines and cut them off. They surrendered without a single shot being fired. Seer Yilmoth's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The Xanathi need not fight at all. We can reach into the minds of our enemies and show them the futility of resistance. Fear is a more powerful weapon than any gun or bomb. Jake listened to these stories with wide eyes, like a child hearing tales of distant adventures. Humans have never faced a real galactic war, he said. I hope we never have to. The meeting broke for lunch. Jake and Lisa walked together toward the human section of the station. Other species gave them barely a glance. To the galaxy, humans were the newest members, useful for simple tasks, but not worth worrying about. Captain, Lisa said quietly as they walked. The translation system had a glitch during the break. I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. Jake stopped walking. What did you hear? General Vexnul was talking to Ambassador Zeftar in the corridor. He called us upright pets who stumbled into space. He said humans are good for cleaning their ships and building their trade stations, but that we'll never be a real power in the galaxy. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, What did Zeftar say? He agreed. He said humans are like children playing with toys they don't understand. He suggested that maybe it's time to put us in our place, to make sure we remember who the real powers are. They reached their quarters. Jake sat down at his desk and activated a secure communication channel. The screen showed only static, but Jake knew someone was listening. "This is Morrison," he said. "The mask is getting heavy. They're planning to test us." A voice came through the static, distorted and barely recognizable. "Do you want to take it off?" Jake looked at Lisa. She had been his intelligence officer for 5 years. She had played her role perfectly, appearing weak and nervous in front of alien representatives who thought they were reading her correctly. But Jake could see the real Lisa Brooks in her eyes. The woman who had survived 3 Black Ops missions that didn't officially exist. The woman who had memorized the psychological profiles of every major alien species they had encountered. "Not yet," Jake said. "Let them make the first move. Let them show the galaxy what they really think of us." The voice in the static was quiet for a moment. "And if they push too far?" Jake looked out the window of the station. In the distance, he could see ships from dozens of different species. The galaxy was vast and full of civilizations that considered themselves superior to humanity. They had built their empires through conquest, through intelligence, through fear. They looked at humans and saw a species that had achieved space, travel through luck and stubbornness rather than any real capability. They had no idea what they were really looking at. "If they push too far," Jake said, "then the galaxy will learn what humans are really like when we stop pretending to be harmless." He ended the communication and turned to Lisa. "How long do you think it will take them to test us?" Lisa smiled, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. Her smile was cold and calculating, the smile of someone who had spent years studying how to destroy things efficiently. "Vexnal is impatient. Zeftar thinks he's smarter than he is. I give it 2 weeks before they do something stupid. And when they do, then we show them what 50 years of careful observation and planning can accomplish." Lisa's voice was soft, but Jake heard the steel beneath it. "We show them what happens when you underestimate a species that evolved by outsmarting everything that tried to eat it." Jake nodded and returned to his reports. He had 3 more meetings that afternoon. He would sit quietly and let alien representatives explain how the galaxy worked. He would nod and smile and ask humble questions about technologies that humans supposedly couldn't understand. He would wear the mask a little longer, but in the back of his mind he was already planning for the day when the mask would come off. The day when the galaxy would learn that the quiet, harmless humans had been watching and learning and preparing for this moment since the day they first left Earth. The day when 3 major galactic powers would discover they had made the worst mistake in their species' history. They had mistaken patience for weakness. That mistake was going to cost them everything. 2 weeks later, the attack came exactly as Commander Lisa Brooks had predicted. The human colony of New Denver was a small settlement on the edge of human space. From orbit, it looked like any other frontier world. Farming domes, mining operations, and a small spaceport. The population was listed as 12,000 civilians, mostly families trying to build new lives away from the crowded worlds of human core space. Colonel Danny Pierce watched the Draconian fleet approach through his hidden observation post buried 3 miles underground. 15 heavy cruisers and a command ship, more than enough firepower to level every building on the planet's surface. General Vexnal was making a statement. "Sir," said Sergeant Amy Johnson from her position at the communications array, "we're receiving their surrender demand." Pierce nodded. "Put it through." General Vexnal's voice filled the underground bunker. "Humans of New Denver, this world now belongs to the Draconian Empire. You have 1 hour to surrender all weapons and prepare for occupation. Any resistance will be met with total destruction. This is the price of thinking you can claim territory without the strength to defend it." On the surface, the colony's emergency sirens began to wail. Colonists ran through the streets, loading belongings onto transports and fleeing toward the hills. The local defense force, a small group of volunteers with outdated weapons, tried to set up a perimeter around the spaceport, but looked hopelessly outmatched. Dr. Karen Walsh ran from her research station toward the evacuation shuttles. She was crying, her hands shaking as she tried to carry her research data. A young mother with 2 small children helped her climb aboard a transport that was already overloaded with refugees. "Are we going to be okay?" the woman asked Dr. Walsh. "I don't know," Karen replied, her voice breaking. I just don't know. The transport lifted off just as Draconian dropships began landing at the spaceport. Draconian soldiers, each one 8 feet tall and covered in natural armor, spread out through the colony. They met no resistance. The human defense force had abandoned their positions, leaving their weapons behind. Captain Steve Rodriguez of the Colonial Defense tried to coordinate the evacuation from his command post, but Draconian jamming made communication difficult. His few remaining soldiers looked terrified as they watched the alien forces take control of the colony with almost casual ease. This is Rodriguez to any human forces still in the area. He transmitted on an emergency frequency. New Denver has fallen. I repeat, New Denver has fallen. We're falling back to defensive positions in the northern mountains. All civilians are to evacuate immediately. The message cut off as Draconian forces overran his position. By the end of the first day, New Denver belonged to the Draconian Empire. Their soldiers patrolled empty streets while their engineers began setting up occupation headquarters in the former Colonial Administration building. General Rex Thor, commander of the occupation force, stood in what had been the mayor's office and looked out over his new territory. Too easy, said his aide, Lieutenant Morduk. These humans fold at the first sign of real resistance. As expected, Rex Thor replied. The galaxy will see how quickly humans abandon their colonies when faced with superior force. Other species will think twice before trusting human promises of mutual defense. What Rex Thor didn't know was that 3 miles below his feet, Colonel Pierce was having a very different conversation. Phase 1 complete, Pierce reported to his underground command staff. All assets are in position. The bunker around him was not a hastily built shelter. It was a sophisticated military installation that had been under construction for 2 years. The walls were lined with screens showing feeds from cameras hidden throughout the colony. Banks of computers processed data on Draconian movement patterns, equipment specifications, and communication frequencies. Civilian extraction? Asked Lieutenant Ben Taylor from his position at the intelligence station. 100% successful, replied Sergeant Johnson. All 12,000 assets are safely in the secondary facilities. Pierce smiled. Assets, not civilians. Every person who had lived in New Denver for the past 3 years had been a member of Earth's military or intelligence services. The farmers were special forces operators. The shopkeepers were signals intelligence specialists. The teachers were weapons experts. Even the children were the sons and daughters of military families, trained from birth to play their roles perfectly. Dr. Karen Walsh, who had appeared to panic during the evacuation, was actually Earth's leading expert on Draconian biology and psychology. Her research station had been gathering detailed intelligence on Draconian weaknesses for months. The data she had appeared to save was actually a carefully prepared psychological profile of every Draconian officer in the occupation force. Captain, Rodriguez had not been overrun. His position had been deliberately abandoned according to a predetermined schedule. His soldiers had not fled in fear. They had moved to hidden positions throughout the colony where they could observe and record every aspect of Draconian occupation procedures. Surveillance report, Pierce ordered. Full coverage, reported Taylor. We have eyes and ears in every building the Draconians have occupied. Their communication frequencies are mapped. We've identified their command structure and psychological profiles of all senior officers. Analysis of their first-day operations? They're following standard Draconian occupation protocol exactly. No improvisation, no adaptation to local conditions. They're treating this like every other colony they've ever taken. Pierce nodded. The Draconians were powerful, but they were also predictable. They had conquered dozens of worlds using the same methods every time. They had never faced an enemy that had studied their techniques for decades and prepared specifically for this moment. What about the other assets and system? Pierce asked. Merchant vessel New Hope is maintaining position at the edge of the system, broadcasting distress calls and requests for diplomatic intervention, Johnson reported. Freighter Denver's Pride is requesting permission to evacuate remaining civilians. Survey ship Mountain View is conducting geological surveys in the asteroid belt. All 3 ships were actually Earth fleet vessels with full military crews and hidden weapons systems. They had been positioned months in advance, waiting for exactly this scenario. Admiral Helen Carter's voice came through the secure communication system from Earth. "Pierce, what's your assessment?" "They took the bait completely, Admiral. They think they're occupying a helpless farming colony. They have no idea they're sitting on top of one of our most sophisticated military installations. And the test data?" Pierce looked at the screens showing Draconian soldiers setting up guard posts and supply depots. "Dr. Walsh's psychological profiles are proving accurate. We can predict their patrol patterns, their communication schedules, even their recreational activities. They're following their programming exactly." "Excellent. How long before you're ready for Phase 2? Pierce checked his chronometer. The Draconians had been in control of New Denver for 18 hours. In that time, his teams had mapped every aspect of their occupation force, identified their weaknesses, and prepared countermeasures for every possible response. "We can begin Phase 2 whenever you give the order, Admiral." "Stand by for final authorization," Carter replied. "The President wants to be certain we're ready for what comes next." Pierce understood. Phase 2 would end the pretense forever. Once they began, there would be no going back to the old relationship between humans and the galaxy. Every alien species would learn what humans were really capable of, and that knowledge would change everything. "Sir," said Sergeant Johnson, "we're receiving a transmission from the Draconian command ship. They're broadcasting their victory to the entire galaxy." "Put it on screen." General Vexnell appeared on the main display, standing in front of a Draconian battle flag. "Today, the Draconian Empire has demonstrated the weakness of human expansion. The colony of New Denver fell without meaningful resistance. Let this be a lesson to all species who believe they can claim territory without the strength to defend it. The galaxy belongs to the strong." Pierce watched the broadcast with interest. Vexnell was doing exactly what human intelligence had predicted, using the easy victory to intimidate other species and establish Draconian dominance in this sector of the galaxy. The transmission ended. Pierce turned to his staff. "Gentlemen, prepare for Phase 2, he said. "It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you mistake human patience for human weakness." His officers began activating systems that had been hidden throughout the colony for years. Weapons came online. Surveillance networks activated. Communication jammers powered up. In 12 hours, the Draconians would learn that they had not conquered a human colony. They had walked into a trap that had been 50 years in the making, and they were about to discover that the quiet, harmless humans had been carefully studying how to kill them efficiently for longer than some Draconian soldiers had been alive. The killing began at exactly midnight, Colony Standard Time. Colonel Pierce had chosen the time carefully. Dr. Walsh's psychological profiles indicated that Draconian soldiers experienced their lowest alertness levels during the period that corresponded to deep night on their homeworld. Their guard rotations followed patterns that left predictable gaps in coverage. The first Draconian to die never saw his killer. Sergeant Kyle Murphy had been hiding in the colony's water treatment facility for 36 hours. He had watched Draconian engineers inspect the building, mark it as secure, and establish a regular patrol pattern. Every 4 hours, a single soldier walked the perimeter. The soldier always stopped at the same 3 points to scan for threats. When the soldier reached the second checkpoint, Murphy was waiting. The Draconian never made a sound. Murphy's blade found the gap between neck scales that Dr. Walsh had identified in her anatomical studies. The soldier dropped silently to the ground, his weapon clattering on the concrete. Murphy dragged the body inside the facility and positioned it according to his training. The Draconians would find their comrade sitting against a wall, apparently, asleep at his post. It would be hours before they realized he was dead. By then, 17 more Draconian soldiers would have joined him. Across the colony, Pierce's teams moved with precision that came from years of preparation. They had studied not just Draconian biology but Draconian psychology. They knew which fears kept Draconian soldiers awake at night. They knew which ancient superstitions still influenced their behavior, even among the most modern military units. Lieutenant Sarah Kim found her target at the communications center. The Draconian operator was alone, monitoring transmissions from the fleet. Kim disabled the backup generators first, plunging the building into darkness. Then she activated a sound system that began playing recordings of Draconian death songs, funeral music from their homeworld that no living Draconian would ever broadcast. The operator tried to flee, but Kim was waiting in the corridor. She killed him quickly, then arranged his body in the traditional Draconian position for honoring the dead. When his relief arrived in 2 hours, they would find their comrade laid out as if prepared for burial by his own kind. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Captain Jeff Davis had spent 3 years studying Draconian military doctrine. He knew that their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness, their rigid adherence to protocol. Draconians followed the same procedures in every situation because those procedures had always worked before. But no Draconian military manual had a protocol for enemies who killed silently and left bodies arranged according to Draconian religious customs. Davis and his team struck the vehicle depot next. They killed the guards without raising an alarm, then sabotaged the vehicles in specific ways. Some would explode when started, but others would simply break down after exactly 1 hour of operation, the sacred time period that Draconians associated with the journey to their afterlife. By dawn, General Rex Thor faced a crisis that his training had never prepared him for. "Report," he demanded from his aide, Lieutenant Morduk. 23 soldiers are dead, sir. No signs of struggle, no indication of how they were killed. Some were found in positions that suggest they arranged themselves for burial. Rex Thor studied the reports on his desk. Each death was different, but all showed the same impossible pattern. Elite Draconian soldiers trained from birth for warfare had been killed by an enemy that left no trace and seemed to know intimate details of Draconian culture and biology. Security cameras? Disabled or looped. The enemy knows our surveillance systems better than we do. Rex Thor felt something he had never experienced in 40 years of military service. Fear. Not fear of death. Draconians were taught to embrace death in battle. This was something worse. Fear of the unknown. Fear of an enemy that killed like a ghost and thought like a Draconian. "Double the guard rotations," he ordered. "No soldier goes anywhere alone. Every building is to be checked, every hour." But Colonel Pierce had anticipated this response. The second wave of attacks began that afternoon. This time the humans didn't just kill, they left messages. Sergeant Amy Johnson led a team that struck the supply depot. They killed the guards and stole nothing. Instead, they left behind a recording playing continuously in perfect Draconian language. The voice recited the names and birth dates of every Draconian soldier in the occupation force, along with detailed descriptions of their families back home. The message was clear. "We know who you are. We know where you come from. We can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime." When Rex Thor listened to the recording, he heard his own name and the names of his 3 children on Draconia Prime, billions of miles away. "How?" he whispered. Lieutenant Morduk had no answer. How could humans, supposedly primitive and weak, have intelligence files on individual Draconian soldiers? How could they know the personal details that should have been classified military secrets? The attacks escalated throughout the week. Pierce's teams struck with increasing boldness, but never in ways that Draconian doctrine could counter. They sabotaged equipment that wouldn't be needed for days. They left traps that would only activate when specific Draconian rituals